Hello. Today we're going to do the mini training on self-care practices. And I want to start this training off with asking you to politely throw out everything that you think a self-care practice should look like. Okay. Maybe even write them down. So sometimes when we think about self-care, we think about exercise, we think about bubble baths or spas or massages, right? Sometimes we think about ordering out or cooking in or a million other little things. And just really quickly, write down everything that you think self-care means to you. And when you look at that list, so maybe you paused and wrote them down. When you look at that list, what comes to your mind when you see it, right? I know when I did this exercise for myself, what came to mind was a lot of shoulds, a lot of, I don't have time for this. That would be nice. Other people, that's really lovely that they have time for it, but that's unreasonable for me. And then after those thoughts came feeling of dread, overwhelm, frustration. Am I ever going to be able to have a self-care practice? Am I ever going to be able to actually do this? Maybe I can't. Maybe I'm not someone self-care is going to be helpful for. Maybe I can't access self-care. Maybe I'll never get self-care. And now I'm in kind of a little thought spiral that's not helpful and is the opposite of kind of self-care, because it's perpetuating the problem that maybe I was going to be asking self-care to help me solve. So I want to just notice this pattern of shoulding on ourselves when it comes to the idea of self-care, that there's an expectation that we should have time for self-care, and that if we don't, there's some unknown badness that's happening. Okay, so let's just call the elephant out in the room here and take a peek at that. And I want you to intentionally and purposefully notice the way that I'm going to talk about self-care. And that is that self-care looks different for everybody, right? But that there is a certain function it fills, and that, right, regardless of the topography, the function that it fills is the thing that we want to search for. Okay. And sometimes we have to treat self-care kind of like a reinforcer preference assessment. What serves the function of self-care for us? And we might have to play around with that. We might not get it right the first time. It might evolve over our lifetime, or according to the seasons of life that we're in, or even just the seasons of the world that we're in, right? Like going paddleboarding or kayaking for me is such a self-care thing, but it's not now in the beginning of spring when it's cold as hell in that water and I don't want to fall in. So that, like, it doesn't serve the function right now. And so what's the function of self-care then, right? So the function of self-care, from the way that I like to talk about it, is something that energizes you, and that it energizes you more than it drains you. Okay. Now, this doesn't always mean you like it. Like reinforcement, it doesn't have to be your favorite thing in order to serve the function of self-care. It can, though. It can. And having a good variety and a good balance of self-care activities might be really important. So let's talk about what energizing you versus draining you really means. So there's always a threshold for activities to be effortful, right? And they might be fun, effortful. Like right now, my paddleboard is an inflatable paddleboard. I don't have a car or the space right now where a hard paddleboard would be. It wouldn't make sense for me, right? So if I'm going to go paddleboarding, I have to bring an air pump and pump my paddleboard at the lake, right? And that takes some effort, right? I don't necessarily love doing that, but the payoff of going paddleboarding is more effective, right? In that when I go, I always feel good. I feel good in my body. I feel good in my mind. I feel more centered. I feel more clear. I'm also like, when I'm out there, I have the opportunity to think and be quiet, right? Which is a huge thing for me as a mom who's still in quarantine with 2 little kids. So having a place that's truly quiet and I can hear myself is such a blessing, right? But I don't necessarily like all of the things that lead up to it. The same thing can sometimes go with food, right? I don't always enjoy cooking. Sometimes I do. But when I cook, I prepare foods that are more nourishing than if I were to order out. And there are some days when ordering out is a self-care activity, right? Because it means I don't have to do the cooking. It means I don't have to do as much cleanup to have, like we usually do like DoorDash, right? Like someone brings it to us. So there might be a little bit of cleanup, right? But not as much as if I were to do the cooking. But then other days, so ordering food isn't actually self-care, even though it's something that I like doing because it makes my life a little bit easier on the front end. But in the long term, it doesn't necessarily nourish me and make me feel good, right? Same thing with exercise. There's days where that feels really wonderful, and there's days where it feels like a slog. But over time, those activities net more energy than they take up. Okay. And so that's what I want to look at the function of self-care is that when you engage in self-care activities, do they net you more energy overall? Now, there's some activities that are very draining, right? For me, paperwork in general is very draining. And sometimes I'll do paperwork because it's in service of something that I really need or something that I really want or something that's really important. But overall, paperwork is never something that makes me energized. It never gives back to me, right? It only takes. Now, I want you to spend a few moments thinking about the activities that you do that only take, right? Maybe you'll have 3 columns. Maybe there's activities that you do that only take, which maybe are necessary, right? And then there's activities that are kind of neutral. Maybe they don't really give you much, but they don't really take very much either. Okay, so for me, things like taking a shower, right? They make me feel good, but they also take some effort. And I'm a bath person, so I would always prefer to have a bath, but a shower can sometimes fit the function, right? So it's kind of a neutral one for me. It gives and it takes, but it's kind of in the middle. So maybe you could make a little list of the things that are true for you there too. And then there are the other ones that give more than they take, right? So for me, that I was talking about like paddleboarding, for me, taking a nap sometimes. Right now I'm fidgeting, right? I've got my slime that I'm using, and that always like is kind of it always gives a little bit more than it takes. Like right now I'm really enjoying this slime while I'm working, right? This is functionally my work. And so what things give, right? And then there's a caveat as to where the line is as to when they stop being more energizing than like where they stop being energizing, right? So for me, if I exercise too much, right, and I'm sore for a couple of days rather than like that good sore that's kind of like a little bit tomorrow, but it's not like you can't go up the stairs kind of sore. That's when it's too much, right? That's where the line is that it's kind of moving over beyond self-care and into kind of a draining, right? And every once in a while, like if that's your thing, like you really love exercise and those are your gains and that's your vibe, then maybe that's worth it to you and maybe that's not draining. But for me, that's not necessarily true, right? I don't want to be sore for 2 or 3 days. That's just not what I want. And so where's the line, right? And when we take a look at those lists, I think it'll be interesting because not everything on them is going to be stuff that you like. It's not all bubble baths. It's not all, even though I do like bubble baths, it's not all massages. It's not all, hiring a housekeeper, although that would be a really nice one. Working on that. What things are contributing to your self-care, right? And how can we prioritize those things in service of the life that we want to live, right? Because when we do those self-care activities, they give us more energy than they take, and therefore they allow us to pour into things that are important to us more than we could before. So I'm going to use agency life because that I think is relatable in this context. So when I used to work in an ABA agency, right? A lot of my day was pouring into people who I cared about, people who I wanted to help and who I wanted to be there for. But because of the way that my day was structured and some of the responsibilities that weren't necessarily self-care, like there wasn't necessarily enough self-care, I found myself more drained than energized. And so the quality of care for something that I cared about, right, like the importance of taking care of these families and these kiddos was lagging, right? Like I wasn't able to do as good of a job as I used to because I didn't have the same amount of energy, right? And so that why was really important for me, that kind of click in that I'm not doing as good a job as I'd really like to. And it's not because I'm bad or because I'm bad at my job. It's because this circumstance, this cycle of energy depletion, right? And it's more complicated than that, especially when we talk about burnout. But this is just one part of it. When the cycle of energy is leaving me not where I need to be, like optimally to be able to function. And that on the regular, that like energy bar keeps going down. So I kind of like to think of like a video game, right? And they've got an energy or a health bar, and maybe they need to drink potions during the day. And we can think about those as self-care, right? And as he's running and he's fighting, he's taking damage or whatever during the day, and his energy bar is depleting. And then like if you played old school Zelda, right, where like it got down to like the red and it would beep, 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 beep the whole time that you were playing until you got a health potion. We're running on beep beeps. We're running on beep beeps, and we're like one thing away from dead, right? We're one thing away from a meltdown. We're one draining situation away from losing it, right? And that's not going to be where we want to function optimally to be of service to the tasks that we want to do. We want to get our health bar up to full or 80 to 90%, maybe even 60%, just not the beep beeps. And so when we structure our day around a life that allows us to fill back up during the day, even, bigger ones like during the week or on the weekend, that's when we start creating a life that's more sustainable, right? And then the things that really matter, like maybe that work that you really care about, or your mission or your purpose or your side project or your kids or whatever it might be, you can spend a little bit more time being fully like being able to pour into that in the way that you want to, instead of just the way that you're kind of forced to, if that makes sense. So that's what I want to think about when it comes to self-care. Like, let's look at function over feeling. Feeling is important too. If we're feeling forced all the time and we're feeling like, the only self-care I have is exercise, like this is the only thing I like to do in the day, and it's still like it feels like a lot. Well, we might want to play with, we'll get back to that idea of preference assessment, other ideas of things that might fill us up, right? So we might want to sample some self-care that other people do, right? Like Mallory's got her little, I switched fidget slime. This one smells like cheesecake. And it's got these little dots in it. I don't know if you can see that. So it's kind of got some texture. It's dope. Love it. I spent way too much money on some slime, so that way I could have something lovely to fidget with while I'm doing these videos. And that to me is sampling self-care. This is new. This is a new one for me that I'm sampling. And so will it work? Will it be effective? I don't know. Will I buy more slime in the future? I don't know. But is it worth it for me to figure out how to get more videos recorded so that way I can be more of service to people in a way where I'm energized and filled up according to my mission and my service model? Fuck yes, it is. Fuck yes, it is. And so we got to really, connect to our why and what we want our life to be like, right? Do we want our life to be slimy in a good way? Yeah. Do we want it to be, I have to sit down and do this? No. That's the way that old Mallory would have worked, right? Like just sit down and get things done and then you can go on and do the things that you like. I want to like the things as I go. And that's really important to me. So when we get tapped into what it is that we want to experience and how we want to experience it, I know I want more fun in my day. That's a core value of mine. So how can I make this experience fun? Well, blueberry cheesecake slime with little polka dots in it seems to be doing the job for now. Will it be forever? Who knows? But we can always pivot that. And this is serving the function of self-care for me in this moment, as is making this video, to be quite honest. So I hope that was helpful for you. I hope you tried out those exercises, and I hope that you try it again over and over and over and constantly evaluating what is your self-care, because like I said, it shifts. My version of self-care when my children were very, very small was very different from the self-care that I have right now. And there was some hard acceptance around that because it felt very narrowing, right? And during the pandemic, which for me, I'm still in it because I've still got one more kiddo to get vaccinated. But it's still very, very different. And in the future, I'm open to other things being part of my self-care. And in the past I was, right? But now I'm going to get creative about where I am right now. And this is the way that I want to live. It is a blessing for me to be able to continue to be in quarantine, quite honestly, to be able to keep my daughter safe, who has some, some things and stuff. And I'm willing to figure out how to make this be functional, And so it's reconnecting to your why. All right, friendlies. I hope you enjoyed that. I hope you figured out what is the function of your self-care. How does it function for you, right? I also bought an air fryer because that shit tastes good. And it's easier for me to take care of my nutritional needs quickly and deliciously without having to order out, right? There's another creative one. What is going to be your creative answer? Chat with you soon. Bye.